Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. And tonight, ScioSophia. I have a guest in my studio here, creator ScioSophia. Is that how we should call you?
I
At
I
this
usually
point,
think it's ScioSophia, but I don't
is it
know.
Shio? See, I'm
Yeah,
pronouncing it wrong. Okay, I'm sorry. My bad.
it's okay.
I'm very culturally incompetent. All right. Anyway, I can't even pronounce creators' names. All right. So I've asked you here this evening to talk to us about echo anxiety. And first, I'd like you to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do. You have a channel, it's scrolling across the bottom. She has a YouTube channel that you really need to subscribe to because this is where you will learn about scientific studies. You know what you see in the news? Study shows, study says, study blah, blah. Okay. Well, ScioSophia is here to tell you what that actually means and what the study really said and what they looked at and help you understand it because she has expertise in this area. And now you turn it to you. Explain.
Sure. So yeah, the YouTube channel is ScioSophia, and it's sciosophia.locals.com for the community and interactions there. You're welcome to call me by my first name. My name is Adrian, by the way, so that's totally fine. Kind of thing there. So yeah, I talk with on the YouTube on scientific studies and the intersection there, and help break some of these things down. And also, of course, lately been thinking about some of the colloquial wokeness influence in science and all that kind of stuff, and the bad things that happen there, and some issues in higher ed. So, I mean, you focus on K through 12 more so. I tend to focus on higher ed when I deal with
Right.
higher ed, but seeing as K through 12 eventually feeds into higher ed, whatever's going on at K through 12 is of course of interest to me. But off YouTube, professionally, I'm a climate scientist for a living, so it's very much in my expertise and wheelhouse to be dealing with studies and peer review and goodness knows what, and some of the ins and outs
Right.
of what goes on with universities and things like that. But yeah, I because I deal with climate a lot of times, and I'm not the alarmist as some of my colleagues are. When it comes to it, things like eco anxiety are of interest to me with this. Because it's funny. It's not actually so it's mentioned by the American Psychological Association, but it's not actually like a diagnosable medical health disorder. It's basically a condition of you're perpetually afraid that the world is going to end from climate or something like that. Um, I forget the exact phrasing of it, but it's just like, what is it? Oh, eco anxiety. I can't remember where is it. Eco anxiety, yeah, is the fairly recent psychological disorder afflicting an increasing number of individuals who worry about the environmental crisis. Um, the DSM-5, for mental disorders, actually doesn't include this as a
Okay.
mental
Okay.
disorder. That's why it's like there's the confusion of it. But it
Right.
was 5 years ago when the American Psychological Association did this whole report thing on that and started listing it. But
Right.
since I'm not sure folks know exactly what we're talking about, let me pull this up because I think this might actually tell the story quite nicely. This is an article from the Washington Post. I'm just going to read it and I'll let you react to it, or just the
Okay.
first couple of paragraphs because it's a long article. But see, February 3rd, 2020, Washington Post magazine. The teenagers pour off buses near Denver's Union Station under a baking September sun. Giggling with excitement at skipping out of Friday classes, they join a host of others assembled near the terminal. Native American drummers and dancers rouse the crowd, and there's a festive feeling in the air. But this is no festival. The message these young people have come to send to their city, to their state, and to the nation, to the world of adults, is serious, deadly serious. Quote, "We won't die from old age," reads one of the signs they hoist above their heads. "We'll die from climate change." Yeah, a high school sophomore, Sophie Kaplan, is marching in a bright yellow flowered sundress, but the sentiment on her poster is hardly so sunny. Quote, "Why should I study for a future I won't have?" End quote. She thinks about climate change every day, she tells me. She reads about, quote, "how we're on the brink," and hears her teachers and parents tell her it's up to her generation to fix things. Does this kind of sound very similar to certain things?
Yeah, yeah, like all the things are supposedly in the children to fix, including making sure grandma doesn't die. Like no pressure, kiddo. Realize you've
Mhm.
only been here 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 17 years, whatever. The rest of us been here half a century, but good luck. Fix it all. Yep. We finished school, grad school, business school, medical school, all the things, but we don't know what the hell to do. It's on you guys. Figure it out. Can you even imagine?
Yeah, but that is what it is at this point. So she goes on to say, this student he was interviewing, she goes on to say, I don't understand why I should be in school if the world is burning. What's the point of working on my education if we don't deal with this first?
I have questions. So wait. What's the point of working on my education if we don't fix? First of all, who's we, and how do you propose to fix it if you aren't educated?
Exactly.
Like, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Jonas Salk, when he kind of like fixed polio, that he had a little bit of education under his belt, just like a little. I mean, I'm pretty sure he finished at least 12th grade or whatever the equivalent back then was. I don't think he just woke up one day and said, people are dying of polio. We have to fix this. What's the point of going to school when I have to fix this problem? Whether, I mean, to me, it's just like that they don't hear. And I don't mean to be laughing at the kids. Please, I do
No.
stuff like
We're
that.
not,
That's
not
my
laughing at
own
the kids. No.
That's my own nervous. That's a tick, I think. But I'm not laughing like at them. I'm laughing at the sheer absurdity of the adults that have put these ideas in their heads, because these little protests, they've got to have sponsors, they've got to have people who put them on that bus and inspired them to make those signs. They didn't just wake up one day at the age of whatever and go, let's go do this, right? Somebody got Greta in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody was teaching them this stuff.
But yeah, it's a crazy thing. And I think we see, I know both of us, when we advertised this, we had that one person put the video to us, is like, well, this happened in the Nevada, in front of a Nevada school board meeting. They were freaking out, you must pass this climate change resolution kind of thing. And I don't necessarily have a problem with kids getting passionate. At the same time, you also need to be educated about what you're passionate about. Kind of thing.
Well, that's exactly right, because for those of you who haven't seen these videos, and I'll see if I can find the link and stick it up there, but they're stepping up, and the first thing the kids do, which was fascinating to me, I listen for things other people don't listen for, and I noticed a few things. The first thing they did was appeal to authority. They listed all their memberships in various nonprofit associations and how I'm the secretary of this and I'm the president of this organization. We're talking about high school kids. And they list off all their credentials as if this makes them authorities in what they're about to tell you, that because they've devoted their free time to being part of little activist organizations, that makes them authorities to speak on the issue of climate change and climate science. And they then implore in the most impassioned way their university to, I guess that's who they're speaking to, right? To pass a resolution that they will shift their focus to the urgent emergency of climate change, whatever that means. They even cite one move that they banned styrofoam trays or styrofoam dishes.
I saw that, yeah.
In the dining halls. Well, I mean, that's certainly a good move. I mean, we shouldn't be using styrofoam, my personal opinion. It's just,
styrofoam's a mess.
It's terrible. But so they say that, and I'm with them. I'm like, that's good. And they're like, that's a good move, but. And I'm thinking that's an actual substantial thing that they're doing. And then they turn away, you need to sign this resolution. Now, I haven't read the resolution, but in my experience, resolutions are a lot of words. Like, we commit ourselves to blah, 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 but they aren't necessarily actionable. The Congress passes them all the time. Local governments pass them all the time. It's just like saying, we all have this opinion. Boom. And people go, yay. The opinion, right thing.
It's a virtue signaling that doesn't.
It basically is. And they were saying on the one hand, like, they had a whole slew of kids like, it is absolutely imperative that you pass this thing. My future depends on it. And in the next breath, it's not a big thing. It's just a piece of paper. Why don't you do it? It means everything. And then the thing I heard right after that was, they said, it will change the consciousness of the university. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. Warning bells, warning bells. These kids believe in the collective consciousness. That's scary because it's the belief in the collective consciousness that is a precursor to justifying the wanton slaughter of people who disagree with you.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can fool yourself into believing that the collective that you favor, the group that you identify with, the tribe that you identify with, is of one body and one mind, literally a living organism. And you can convince yourself that anyone not sharing that consciousness is akin to like a disease, a parasite, a virus that is a threat on the body collective, a threat on this collective consciousness. That's what Hitler did. He talked about the nation being a body. And so when I hear high school kids talking about a collective consciousness, all the bells go off. I'm like, this is not good. They're using fear and anxiety to shift these kids into a tribal belief system. And climate's just, to me, this is my assessment. You're the scientist. Climate is just one of the, tenets or branches of this religion. If you have like Christianity, and then you have like Methodists, Presbyterians, this, that, or whatever, or Pentecostals, whatever. Like the critical theory is that religion, and climate theory or climate change theory type of deal is the climate branch of the religion. It's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that like the climate science part of it is actually pretty solid. We're going to get some very good
for sure
scientists and things like that. And we know if I don't know if I'm allowed to swear or not, but you'd have to tell me. But we know our stuff.
I think so.
Okay, we know our shit then. We know what we're doing. And, get good physical science in there. But what has happened is, unfortunately, you get a lot of the more extreme ends of things that get co-opted by people. And that's where a lot of the kind of fear mongering comes from. So like a good example of something that I end up having to deal with is you do have folks who are like, oh goodness, I think Inhofe just announced his intention to resign from the Senate, which is going to be fun by itself. But he was on the Senate floor being like, he was the guy with the snowball on the Senate floor saying, well, how could climate change be happening when it's snowing in a blizzard outside in DC? Well, in the reverse, you'll have somebody say, okay, well, what in Hurricane Harvey was horrible. This is an impact of climate change. And after that tornado outbreak in December, that was a similar thing that was already starting to crop up. Well, this is the result of climate change. This wouldn't happen without climate change. Without waiting for actual scientific understanding of these kinds of things, it happens on both ends when I'm dealing with it, in that you want to say on the one hand, well, this disproves that the climate is changing and things are getting warmer because it's freezing cold and snowing. That's not how it works. And you have the other end with the fear mongering part of it, of the alarmism, saying, well, this disaster that caused so much damage in human lives, that wouldn't have happened were it not for climate change. But that's a misunderstanding of how climate works, because climate doesn't cause any single disaster. It makes something more or less likely. You have to think about it in statistical stuff. So in a given year, when something happens, that's primarily weather. It's not climate.
Right.
So it's a different
Well,
thing.
and that's the thing is, like, so many things, like we saw with COVID, like we've seen with various economic issues, there's always some helpful politician there to misinterpret the science. I shouldn't say the science, to misinterpret the data. And because there is no the science, there's data. And you can have people doing different kinds of experiments and different kinds of studies. And based on how these are funded, I'm sure you could explain this better than I'm about to do, but they can be politicized from the jump based on who funded them and based on how much somebody wants to get more funding and what they want, how they want the results to come out. So, that's why your channel is so important, because you help people understand how to look at studies and that they aren't as cut and dried as the Washington Post would have you believe. And the problem is with kids in K-12, okay, you've got a couple of problems as I see it. And then I want to get your opinion on this. This is from the layperson's viewpoint.
Go for it. We
have students who don't have a good grasp of scientific inquiry in terms of the scientific process. And the empirical, the process of empirical study. They don't teach it well in school at all. Our scores, our national report card, our science scores are the lowest of all the scores next to civics, which is kind of terrifying. But when you look at it, it's like 22% of graduating seniors are proficient in science. That's very concerning when you've got such a high percentage of students who are very, very anxious about the climate. Okay, that's not a good combination, because that means they're spending a lot of time talking about a scientific area, an area of scientific inquiry, climate science, and all of that, without commensurate time and energy spent on how the process of scientific inquiry, so that the students could look at what's coming out from your world
Mhm.
with less emotion. When you don't understand something, it's a lot easier to have people with an agenda manipulate you and play with your head. So we're not doing a good job of teaching it. We're teaching about things that are related to it.
Right.
And that's not good.
Right.
It's the same thing we're doing about race, the same thing we're doing about the economy and crime and police and all the things. We're doing a better job of getting kids whipped into a frenzy about the thing
Yep.
without teaching any background knowledge to understand it. How do
Mm.
you see it?
No, I totally, I do agree. I mean, I agree in the sense that there's not enough background knowledge given, because like I have seen some lesson plans and things like that where they get into the basics of the greenhouse effect and things like that, and how does that work, and what does that mean, and the fact that, oh yeah, the planet, we wouldn't be here talking right now if it weren't for the greenhouse effect existing in some capacity. Earth would be too cold to sustain life without the greenhouse effect in the atmosphere that we have. It's in the climate change perspective where it gets a little concerning, is when you're starting to add more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere than plants and other things can take out. And that's the concern of a warming atmosphere, kind of thing. So we're not talking about that whole kind of background. You know what the greenhouse effect is. And unfortunately, I've run into students who think the greenhouse effect is entirely bad because they're not taught the other part of it, that you wouldn't have life on this planet if you weren't for the greenhouse effect. So
Right,
all things in
exactly.
moderation. But
Yep.
it's just, there's not enough background given. And I think also, one of the things you find, we found this with communications literature, and I think it's pretty true also for like education, in that if you're just like, if your goal is to persuade somebody to do something, right? In communications literature, what we found with, it's a whole subfield of climate stuff now, is climate communication. Um, you can go the apocalyptic narrative route with adults. This is where these studies have been done primarily with adults, but I think you could probably see the parallels in children too. With adults, where you give the apocalyptic narrative that the world is going to end because climate change, you get one of two reactions with adults for the most part. You get the, well, the world's going to end and there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm going to go about living my life. Or you get the other action, you get the other thing of, okay, you're a crazy crack, I'm not going to go listen to anything you have to say, so I'm going to go on living my life. Or you can get the third option of people getting stressed and freaked out in terms
Right.
of what they're listening to. But with kids, I think that third option ends up being more likely when you start giving them things of, the world's going to end, you're not going to have a future. Da, 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 da. I go back to the clip of the kids in Dianne Feinstein's office a few years ago, where they're demanding Dianne Feinstein vote on the Green New Deal or something along that line. And they're there asking for that because they've been told that all these extremes that happen are entirely the fault of climate change, which climate does affect the frequency and the average intensity of extremes. So there's something to that. When you're talking about the change in climate over time, you would change the frequency and intensity of those things. So there is that. But at the same time, you're panicking them about these extremes being there, happening, have always happened. There are going to be changes in the frequency, intensity of those extremes, but you're not letting them know that those climate is about you're not filling in the background information, is
Right.
what bothers me with this. But instead of not realizing, instead of filling in the background information, you're taking a weather disaster in one time period and being able to say, look, this happened because of climate change, kind of thing, and
Mhm.
building the paranoia into a kid's head that the
Right.
world's going to end because something's going to be on fire, or your house is going to get ripped apart by a tornado, or something like that, which is possible to happen anyway, even if the climate wasn't changing, because there's frequency and extremes of these things that happen regardless of the changing climate. And so it drives me crazy to see them getting kids paranoid. It's bad enough with adults, but it drives
Yeah.
me crazy to get kids paranoid. And I think it's actually worse with kids. So it's just like, what is it? Oh yeah, there's a prime definition while we're on it. American Psychological Association describes eco-anxiety as the chronic fear of environmental cataclysm that comes from observing the seemingly irrevocable impact of climate change and the associated concern for one's future and that of next generations.
Right. And the thing I keep coming back to is it's not constructive.
No.
So it doesn't, like, if your goal is really, if you're sincere and your goal is to get people not just motivated to make changes to their individual lives, but motivated to put more pressure on their lawmakers or whatever, like if that's your goal, I just don't think that getting people worked up into a frenzy is effective. I think the only thing it's effective at is getting people worked up into a frenzy, which is its own goal for people who are trying to just turn someone into a noisemaker. I mean, if you're just trying to turn somebody into a little warrior for your cause of making chaos, okay, of just everybody and if you're trying to preoccupy people so they don't learn
Yep.
the actual skills, then it's very, very effective. But if you were sincere, if the people running these things were actually, like you are, sincerely concerned with like understanding what's happening to the climate, to the environment, how the two work together, what role man plays in all of this, what are the tangible steps we can take, now to have a measurable impact on the future, that, but while at the same time taking into account other concerns that humans have for life, like being able to feed ourselves and keep ourselves warm in the winter and things like that, then you need a lot of skills. Like you need to be well educated, well run in math and in science and even in, economics and just geopolitics and all these things to really make a difference. And I feel like that's, I question the sincerity of the people who say that this is the focus and this is what they want to teach kids in K-12, because there's no way, for example, what is a fifth grader supposed to do? Right. See, now, if you came to me and you said, the way we're going to do this in K-12 is we're going to, in K-5, we're going to focus on natural life science, primarily life science, a little earth science. In the intro range, we're going to do a hefty dose of baby botany. We're going to plant plants and we're going to learn about how plants grow and about photosynthesis and about these things, how it takes greenhouse gases out of the environment. And we're going to like hang out in that zone until these kids really understand how important plants are. That like plants, trees, all of this is really important. And, we'll have some lessons on like ecology. We'll have some lessons on, like environmental conservation and planting trees and things like that. That to me would be a great K-5 program where they're getting solid science and they're understanding the importance of trees to removing excess greenhouse gases. And then you could teach them about what the greenhouse effect is and how we want to minimize the gases from getting too much because we don't want the earth to get too warm, but stay there. Don't go any farther than that. And then they learn the importance of trees and grass and things like that. And they're less inclined to want to, damage the environment. Good. Okay. Moving on, middle school and so on. So that as the kids get older and they're better able to deal with these concepts, you just increase the amount of environmental consciousness or eco-consciousness that they have without having it become this like, and by the time they graduate, maybe they're like, I want to go on to college and study how to whatever. I mean, help trees grow faster. I don't know. Or come up with ways to farm in smaller plots of land so we don't need to chop down so many trees or do clear cutting. Or figure out substitutes for paper so that we don't have to cut down trees at all. I mean, whatever the case may be, so that people see that these are things you can do. Right. And focus on something that's actually doable. And instead, it's just like, picture it's like Chicken Little. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. And nothing's happening.
Mhm. And it's interesting because I mean, I see the comment here in the chat about the primordial sun being too weak, and that's not entirely what it is. It's more so that without the atmosphere, all the energy from the sun goes right back out to space, and nothing gets warm on Earth to begin with. Really, it just it gets just insanely cold. So it's more so about the atmosphere than the sun. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. Just saw it in there, and the scientist was in me like, nope, nope, nope. Let me just do that real quick. Wanted to say that, but yeah, what struck me is that so at the end of 2021, the Lancet published a preprint of a paper. I think it's actually still going through peer review, so it's not done yet. But Nature did this whole big write up of it in September, and that's actually what I'm going to put on the screen for you in a second, because they basically surveyed 10,000 students. I think it was 16 to 25 young people, 16 to 25. So like teenagers just getting through college. And I think probably with IRB complications, they couldn't go with kids younger than that. But what they found, it was 10,000 people, 10 different countries, 1,000 students each. The US was one of them. But I was just like, holy crap when I read this. So I think it's the first definitive kind of thing that maybe this is a good idea to be panicking kids. Let me see if I can't share this real quick. Share screen. Window. This one. Here we go. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
You froze.
Did I freeze?
Yeah, you're frozen. I can hear you, but you're frozen. You still there? Uh-oh. Adrian? Yo, Adrian. Oh no, she's frozen. Here we go. And then there's two of you now.
What the hell just happened?
I have no idea.
I swear I just shared that and I just shared my screen and everything froze, and then StreamYard just shut down. So
do you want to send me the link and I'll try to open it?
Yeah, let me
Her atmosphere disappeared.
What?
That's funny.
That's not it. Okay, hold on.
Yeah,
I gotta find the link real quick. But I was gonna say it's I was not expecting that to happen.
That's hilarious.
It's like, yeah, what happened is I clicked on it, I clicked share, it froze for a second, and then all of my Microsoft Edge windows shut off. Every single one. So somehow I crashed Microsoft Edge.
I didn't know you could run this in that. I have to use Chrome. So
I've been able to do it in Edge without a problem. Maybe we can try this one more time and see if it cooperates.
If it doesn't work, you can always shoot me the link.
Yeah, no, I'll shoot you the link in the chat right now, just to be
okay.
just to
be on the safe side.
We'll try this one more time and see if it cooperates.
All right. Let me see if I get it over here.
Oh, hey, it worked this time.
Awesome. I see it. I see it. There it is.
Oh goodness. So yeah, this was in Nature. The lovely thing that Nature is there, blow it up a little bit. But young people's climate anxiety revealed in landmark survey. But I think let me see here. 10,000 people in 10 countries, how they felt about climate change and government responses to it. Results released in a preprint on September 14th found that most respondents were concerned about climate change, with nearly 60% saying they felt very worried or extremely worried.
60%?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Oh, it gets better, actually. Well, I shouldn't say it gets better. It gets crazier.
Wow.
Many associated negative emotions with climate change. The most chosen were sad, afraid, anxious, angry, powerless. See climate anxiety. Overall, 45% of participants said their feelings about climate change impacted their daily lives. This is why I'm going to say the fear part of this. Deb?
I'm here. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. So I was about to say, like, and we wonder why kids are cynical and feel hollow and are asking questions like, why should I bother? Yeah. Why should I bother study? Why should I read? They're like spending all day on the internet and escapist stuff, or they're looking forward to the metaverse. I mean, who wouldn't?
But this is the actual graphic that Nature has, and they're based on the data from the preprint. And it's just like, I can just leave it up here. You can see it for yourself.
Wow.
Just
Okay,
know.
I knew it was bad, but you guys, this is where this is this is extreme. And okay. Okay. So the mom in me is
Yeah.
saying, "Okay, scientist, there's less we can do about this hysteria in our schools than there is that we can talk to our kids. What should we be doing and saying to our children to help them not be anxious about this subject? Like, I mean, what could be done? And what, if anything, should we be telling the schools to try to get them to cut the crap? They're not. This isn't helpful. This isn't education.
No.
This is not education. I mean, and I don't know. I just don't even know what their goal is. If you ask them, it's all like awareness, and awareness.
Yeah.
Okay, they got to spend 13 years in school. I think you've gone way past awareness if you started when they were 6.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, they need to understand that, well, first of all, I don't think awareness is an appropriate goal for children. Big, huge, complex problems that require thousands of different skill sets like coming together to fix it. I don't think it's an appropriate goal for K-12.
No, it's not an appropriate goal to freak them out about the implications of something. It is important to understand, I think, appropriately as you're moving through grade levels and what have you,
Right.
As you're teaching, like what climate is, what climate change is, science behind it, some of the things, do's and don'ts. I mean, as you get into high school and what have you, you might get into some of the more complicated aspects of it. And certainly in college, if you're taking courses in physical sciences, there's usually a climate change thing that is discussed about in college now, and in degree programs that are related to environmental sciences. So it's like if you're doing meteorology, climatology, geology, oceanography, environmental sciences, environmental sustainability, geography, all of those in college have climate change courses now, at least from what I can find. And so I don't have a problem with teaching climate science. In fact, I encourage it. You know, I love it when kids learn about my field. I do have a problem with causing kids to be freaked out about what's being done.
Well, and are they really teaching climate science, or are they just teaching that there's this political, there's this thing called climate change. It's a terrible crisis and evil people are standing in the way of progress. Because that's what I'm seeing in the lesson plans, is like the bad people are standing in the way of fixing it. That's what I'm seeing. And it's kind of like the bad people are standing in the way of fixing racism. The bad people are standing in the way of fixing homophobia, and the bad people. That's what the kids are coming away with.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think needs to change in schools as relates to that is, because you notice one of the big things here, like 57% of the kids here said they felt powerless, right? And if you're saying you feel powerless, well, what are you going to be? You're going to be angry. You're going to be anxious. You're going to be afraid. You're going to be sad. You don't have control over this giant thing. And the truth is you do, actually. There's a lot of things that can be done related to climate change and actually get into doing those kinds of things. I think one of my favorites in just terms of simple stuff, I can't believe it gets ignored as much as it does, but there's something called Project Drawdown, which is really, really great and offers all of these interesting solutions that are not what you would think they are. They're like off the beaten path. They're like replacing all the refrigerant with an eco-friendly refrigerant. Well, that's something you can talk about with your family. And, as a family, you can make that decision if you want to do that. Just making your home energy efficient is a big thing to do. It's like a lot of power companies will offer you credits now if you're upgrading your HVAC system to say more energy efficient system, because you are doing something that's environmentally friendly, but you're also costing them and yourself, less money. And more efficient system is much better for you financially at the same time. But what bothers me with the way they're teaching this is, did you notice in the part of the thing here was about, was about how they felt about government responses to it.
What did they say?
The survey, the largest of its kind, asked 10,000 young people in 10 countries how they felt about climate change and government responses to it.
Okay. As if they know what the government responses to it are. But okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
they may not know.
Right. Even I can't answer that. I pay pretty close attention, and I honestly, with the exception of we're eliminating our domestic oil and gas production.
Mhm.
Oh, it's a great move. Yeah. Okay. Russia just invaded Ukraine. Next.
Oh, goodness,
So,
yeah.
but I couldn't tell you like specifically what we're doing or evaluate whether it's effective or not. And I'm an
Yes.
adult. So
I'm gonna see. I mean, I'm gonna see if I can bring it up because some of the stuff in the actual preprint is, if you
right.
think this is scary, that's even scarier. Um, what they didn't talk about in this Nature article, because I saw it in the preprint and I'm like, oh dear lord. But
But, I have
but
to
the,
I
but
have
the,
to
but the
say
reason but the reason I was saying this is like, why are we teaching kids that the government has to take care of everything? This is why I think that
thank
powerlessness
you.
comes into it, because yeah, it's just like you're teaching the kids that the government has to take care of it, that the kids can't do something about it. And truthfully, because one of the things I do in my job is in my professional job anyway, is working with local communities and states and what have you. There are lots of little communities that are doing their own dang things to take care of it. You don't need the big federal government to take care of absolutely everything, or the global government to take care of absolutely everything. And if that's something kids want, I mean, that's one of the things that we do recommend, is like, if you're dealing with anxiety with this, is like things that you can do locally. Get
Right.
away from the government being the big thing. So just like, get out there and do some conservation work locally. Get to
Yep.
talking to your community and what do you think you want to do? And kids can help out with that. Take them to go planting trees. You know,
Yes. Yes, exactly. That's what I was saying. Especially in K-12, you have such a golden opportunity to help kids feel really, a sense of self-esteem and accomplishment, not to mention, connection to their community and their neighbors. Go up, work in a community garden, plant some trees, plant whatever. I mean, have a whole Earth Day thing where you go out and plant trees and flowers. It doesn't have to be a day of panic.
yeah.
um, I remember when I was a kid, the big issue was nuclear weapons because I was in school in, like the 70s and early 80s. And I graduated high school in 83.
Mm,
So the big thing, we had duck and cover drills when I was in like fourth grade, okay, in the early 70s. And I remember being terrified that nuclear weapons were going to rain down on us and that the Soviet Union, 99, 99 Luftballon, whatever, that was in college. I was hearing that song like every other day. So the notion that we might be in a nuclear war was what dominated my
mm,
thoughts. And I won't go so far as to say that I was anxious about it like these kids are anxious, but it was in the back of my mind that it was a possibility that we could
mhm,
end up in a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And I remember the feeling of being, helpless. There's nothing I can do. These are, they could just, some crazy person in Russia could do this, or Soviet Union could do this crazy thing, and that would be the end of the world. And it was terrifying. And so, but what we're dealing with, I think, is actually worse in the sense that, worse for the kids because I did console myself with the line from the song that let's hope they love their children too. It's kind of like I just kept telling myself they're people, they have children. This is a conscious human choice. Like human beings would have to push buttons
mhm,
for this to occur. Whereas with climate change, we're teaching our kids like forces completely beyond your control that are, like happening and it's huge and it's because of decisions of hundreds of millions of people and there's just nothing you can do about it. I got to think that's way scarier,
oh yeah.
for them.
Well, it's funny because it's the same. As much as it's the same thing of, it's so big you can't do it on your own. There's nothing you can really do about it as a person. You've got to go campaign for others to enact such and such policy, which I don't like the manipulation of kids to do that. I find that ethically extremely troubling. But the other side of that is like, well, the other side of that is, I've seen this in a few different more woke studies, if you will, or woke commentaries, has been, well, this is all the fault of the global north against causing poverty and stuff in the global south by doing all this burning of fossil fuels and what have you. And I think, yeah, it was there was a video on my channel reviewing a paper called Critical Climate Justice. where it started talking about things like climate colonialism and what have you. And I'm like, oh my dear God.
That's a marriage made in hell. Like, we do not need those two disciplines to get together. What
But
about so I know you want to go through this study
there's
that you
only a
have in
couple
front.
of things I want to go through because this is the way this preprint works with Lancet. This is actually open source, so this is a link that I can get to you, and your community can have fun looking at it, and what have you. But there's a few things I wanted to show because there were some interesting things. So percentages of whole sample by country of negative thoughts about climate change and beliefs about government response. So this wasn't as a graphic in there, and this is a preprint, so I suspect this will be worked up into a graphic maybe, or this is actually might be the graphic itself. But so, like, thoughts about climate change: people have failed to care for the planet, the future is frightening, humanity is doomed, less opportunity than parents, most valued will be destroyed, family security will be threatened, hesitant to have children. This is the percentages across all countries of the young people who feel that way. And this is for the individual countries, what those percentages are. That were
Where's the U.S.? Are we more or less neurotic than everybody else?
Well, the U.S. is actually less, not quite as low as Nigeria, but 78% of the young people in the survey in the U.S. say
the Philippines and Portugal and the U.K. They're pretty they're really upset in the Philippines.
But the future is frightening. These are. I mean, let's see. Yeah, except for the last one, across all. Oh goodness, across all countries, these are majorities of all the young people they surveyed. So of 10,000 people in 10 countries, 1,000 people per country, 1,000 young people per country. You know, a Wikipedia snippet, I don't know. The way the Lancet is and the way a lot of journals have gone, it might not be behind a paywall after it's fully peer reviewed and published. So we'll have to see. But if need be, I know how to get a hold of these things.
Yeah, right. That's why you guys need to subscribe to her channel. Don't forget, because she does go over this stuff from things that you can't see. So,
but these are negative thoughts about climate change that X percentage of the samples in each country think are thinking about. So I wanted to bring this up because in a way, some of this is more scary than the thing of being very worried or extremely worried, because it's like 8 and 10. There you go. Roughly 8 and 10 in the U.S. say people have failed to care for the planet, and this is 16 to 25-year-olds that we're talking about that they surveyed.
Wow. Mind you, I wonder how many of them look around at people failing to care for themselves. Like, in other words, the rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease and things like that. You know, like, we've got a high percentage of people who don't take care of their own bodies. So, you know, and in fairness, a lot of what we know about the climate change situation we've learned in the last 20 years. So it's, you know, it's not like it wasn't being studied before that, but I think they're telling they're acting like they're telling kids that we've sort of always known that these things were bad and we did them anyway. It's kind of the impression I get from the learning materials. Not that, you know, now that we know that these things are bad, we got to do something, because we really didn't know. It's just like people didn't know smoking was bad for a long time. And then there was a period where we did know and it got covered up. Right. And then it was widely known. Well, it's kind of the same thing. It was like, we didn't know, we knew and it got covered up. And then now we know it's widely known, but it's being sort of exploited.
Yeah, I would say at least in the education field, it's only been like in the last 20 years where that's really been
that's what I mean.
But there's been lots of concern about it for much longer than that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
In the climate science field, because even when, like, I know there's a lot of jokes about this, but in the 70s when it was all a thing that we're going to die from an ice age kind of thing.
I remember that Newsweek or Time cover. I think it was one of the two. I remember that when I was a kid, then a coming ice age. And I was like, that did scare me actually a lot. That did scare me. I remember that.
But behind the scenes, that's actually not what the scientists were talking about. So Spencer Weert is his name. He has a book called the Discovery of Global Warming, as it were, and he walks through the whole history. And he actually talks about that point in time. It's like, well, no, behind the scenes, there was still everybody talking about it. Everything's getting warmer, but it didn't get the main press coverage that would freak people out. So in reality, as much as people want to skewer my profession, that, you know, we were saying it was going to be an ice age in the 70s, that actually isn't true. That's not what happened in the field behind the scenes. There were a lot of people who are still saying the planet's getting warmer. It's just in a cold slot right now, because you don't lose the variability from year to year with the climate as you're moving forward in time. You don't lose that year to year variability. You're still going to have years that are colder. It's just that the background trend is getting warmer as you're going up, and that's
You guys
another thing
must
that's important
hate
to recognize.
mainstream journalists.
Oh my God! Well, I do.
I can't even imagine if you're like a serious scientist and they grab one of these studies and they're like, and you're sitting back there going, no, like, why are you doing? They really mess it up.
Journalists and politicians drive me crazy because sometimes they both do a good job of misrepresenting this stuff.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention with this is just the next table, because this is
I was going to say the thoughts about government response.
Yeah, failing young people, lying about impact of actions taken, dismissing people's distress, betraying me, future generations, acting in line with climate science, protecting me, planet, future generations, can be trusted, doing enough to avoid catastrophe. The numbers are lower, but in general, it's like these first 3 or 4. It's just like, well, you're failing me as a young person. You're not helping me. Do you get the me kind of sense that's there?
Yeah. Yep, very much so. Which, I mean, come on, young people are egocentric to start with. That's just kind of part of the deal. But we're encouraging it with all of this kind of questioning and all this kind of focus, and we're not helping them do anything. Like you said, the feelings of helplessness make sense in this context. And I think, like I said, I think it's all intentional. If your goal is to, like Mao did, harness the power of young people to pursue revolution or a political agenda or just get people riled up, it's working perfectly at that. What about teaching the good news? So, for example, my husband works for Duke Power, and one of the things that he gets frustrated by is how little Americans know about the progress that's been made in terms of whether it's cleaner air or even reducing, like the United States in particular has reduced our output of greenhouse gases, I believe, pretty significantly, even without participating in the Paris Accord and all that. And that gets zero mention, like zero press. So this is the kind of information that I think we need to be sharing with our kids, with students, especially in K-12, alongside, because we want them to feel like the adults haven't cast them to damnation. We want them to say that, no, there are people, including at Duke, for example, they run a loss. In wind and solar, they run at a loss there, but they still do it, because in part because the government is, kind of like nudging them, but really they've been doing it since before that. And they're still continuing to research and try to find better, more efficient ways to do it. It produces a lot less power for, given the cost of it and everything, but they make it up in other areas. So all of the above approach is being done by private interests. They're just not talking about it. The media never covers it. You can go to like the Duke website, or you can go to these websites and you can see, like, what are you doing for the climate? But then nobody believes it. They're like, oh, they're self-interested. They don't want to. No, it's actually true. And if people understood, for example, if American students understood and compared side by side the output of the United States versus, let's say, China, they would see that we're not the evil bad guys that we're made out to be, and maybe direct some of their frustration a little farther to the other side of the globe where it belongs, and possibly look to grow up and join some of the efforts of the people who are doing this. Maybe they would even, if you're going to talk activism, maybe they would start scratching their chin and saying, why not nuclear? Why aren't we teaching our kids about nuclear? We teach about solar and wind and water. No discussion whatsoever in K-12 about nuclear power. I did a whole diagram in 8th grade of a nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
Like, we learned all about nuclear power production, and I was like mesmerized. That was the coolest thing ever. Because like, this is, I mean, it was a little scary, but at the same time, we realized they were teaching us this in school, that this had to be like the future, because it was clean. It would last for so long, like you could, on such a small amount of fuel, you could power the freaking world. And I remember thinking, this is the greatest thing ever. And now you mentioned nuclear and it's like,
Well,
They don't even talk about it.
nuclear has an unfair stigma attached to it because of nuclear meltdowns. And I mean, with the news, we can talk about the fact, I mean, the Russians have just taken over the site of Chernobyl. And so there is serious concern right now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine that the nuclear waste at Chernobyl is going to be released, which would be absolutely devastating. But but
They
that's
might use it to extort like a peace agreement out of them or something. That would be my guess is like, do have activity around there and then say like, we're going to do something with this unless you do what we want. I can't see them just destroying it to destroy it because if the winds blow the wrong way, that's gonna come
would end
back on
badly
them.
for them. And it generally would get pushed into Russia if they were to just release it into the atmosphere. But
It
no,
went
it's
all the way to Norway with Chernobyl and as far south as Italy. I was in Vienna, Austria when Chernobyl happened.
mm,
We had radioactive dust on the ground in Vienna. So, and Italian farmers were setting fire to entire crops of artichokes, and it was a bad
it was
scene.
bad, yeah. But
So,
that's why nuclear power has an unfair stigma attached to it. Is a lot of the nuclear meltdowns and things like that, and a bunch of them were not necessarily failures of like a meltdown of the thing as much as a failure of safety equipment. Because like Chernobyl, the reason it melted down was it was such a poorly designed and poorly built with very little safety protocols, with Soviet cutting corners and things like that, that it ended up
well,
being really, really,
and
really falling apart.
it was human error. I mean, if
Yeah.
you the have you seen the HBO made for, them movie about Chernobyl?
No, I haven't.
I thought it was absolutely superb because what it captured so well, and I'm actually shocked that it got made, is that this was absolutely a breakdown in communication fueled by the kind of, bureaucratic, you know, I got to do this because then I got to be promoted in the party and the party wants me to do, like it really pointed to the human beings and the type of system that they had that caused the problem because they were
Mhm.
running a test they had no business running.
Oh yeah.
Their safety protocols were not in place, and yet they went ahead and did it for political reasons, for sort of like their sort of social credit slash political
Mhm.
reasons. Otherwise, it would not have happened. And that was really tragic. And I think the lesson of that is not that nuclear power is bad. It's actually that communism is bad. Statism is bad.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. I mean, you know my feelings on communism. I dislike
Right.
communism immensely. So,
They had
but
some of the finest scientific minds in the world
mhm,
in the Soviet Union. That's that people forget that, like, at the time, they actually, for all their flaws, one thing the Soviet Union really did still place a high priority on was academic rigor. And
mhm,
in particular in the sciences, because they felt like they were in a race for like nuclear power, for military power, all of which relied on scientific acumen, right?
right.
And so they produced several, new Nobel Prize winners and things like that. So this was not a failure of scientific minds. This was not a failure, like you said, of
You know,
anything other than we got to cut corners because of cost and because of labor and because of this and because of that and please this union and that union and lo and behold,
well, yeah, and I mean, early on, actually, in its history, the Soviet Union had a problem because they wanted things to be so in line with Marxism that any science that didn't line up with Marxism, they kind of axed people. And
exactly.
that's the story of Trofim Lysenko. That's for another day. Because if you had to figure it, which scientist in history has been the greatest mass murderer or the greatest result of death, it's not the folks who invented the nuclear bomb. It's Trofim Lysenko, whose commitment to Marxism resulted in the death of millions in the Soviet Union. But that's a whole
Right.
other story.
Right. But no, but it does, but you know what it does point out though is that science isn't a thing. Okay, it's right, and in the hands of people with bad philosophy, with bad ideas about the role of humans and government and things like that, science, people talk about it like it's a net. It's always a good at all times, and they forget how much bad has been done in the service to really bad ideas with science.
Mhm.
So when
One
we
thing,
teach our kids this stuff, we got to remember that.
yeah. And I was going to say, going back, I think we got off tangent on the point about China and the different who emits more emissions. The This is one thing that doesn't get taught well enough. Yeah, Lysenko is a forgotten monster. He should be forgotten for history. But anyway, um,
Or remembered as a monster, one of the
yeah,
two.
should be remembered as a monster. But one thing I think needs to be taught, which gets ignored with respect to who emits more kind of thing is the per capita versus not in CO2. Nobody teaches the difference here because one group argues that the US is the greatest emitter of carbon dioxide. The other argues that China is the greatest emitter. Truth is, they're both right. Truth is, they're both right because China is the greatest emitter of CO2 in terms of total, but the US is still the largest emitter in terms of per capita CO2. And that's the difference. And that's where the problem lies and where we get into arguments is we eventually end up using two different measures for the same thing. And that just depends on how you want to look at it. China has many more people than the US does. And so it just emits a lot more, but it's a lot less per person than the US, even with all the innovations and things that we have. So it's just like, yeah, but nuclear, I would love to see more of. Solar, and what I can see with like the markets, and your point about the markets is actually really, really valid because there's so many people moving in the direction, companies and what have you, like Amazon's talked about it, FedEx has talked about it, all these different companies moving in the direction of renewables, or at least going from gas to natural gas vehicles or things like that. They're moving in that direction on their own. And so the amount of wind and solar and water too, because hydroelectric's another thing that has come online in the last 10 to 20 years has been great and fantastic and moving in that direction. That's all wonderful. For some of the more alarmistic groups, it's not fast enough. Of course, it's not fast enough, but that's a whole other can of worms. We're not going to get into that. But
I'm just saying, I think that if we taught some of the good news, it might. I don't know.
And people do teach some of the good news. I do know a few scientists that teach some of the good news here. I mean, like, I think Catherine Hayhoe has been good about that in the last few years, where she's a very prominent climate scientist and an expert communicator here. Her series on YouTube is called Global Weirding, if you want to go watch it, where she talks about some of the issues with global warming and things to do about it.
Global Weirding?
Yes. It's a long series she produced with PBS at one point, but it's only on YouTube.
Wow. I'm going to have to check that out. Definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, I ran it through with the group that I had on for the panel chat on trust in experts, and they actually hated it, which was which was interesting. But I understood why, because it is very cartoonish. It's actually done with cartoons, so it might be a little too I guess juvenile for adults, let's put it that way. But I can understand that complaint that why are you talking to me as a child kind of thing was what the folks had problem with when I ran it by that group. But that's a whole other thing. But that is one thing that they don't do with respect to this eco-anxiety thing is it's all about the government. The government has to do it. The government's not doing enough. Well, you're not teaching kids that they can do things about it, that their family can do things about it.
Right.
You can move toward an electric car if you want to. I haven't seen those Joe Rogan episodes, but thank you. Yeah, Andrew Dessler is actually a pretty great climate scientist. I've not talked.
Well,
Kuhnen, but I know him.
I want to read that Kuhnen book. Isn't he the one that wrote the book Unsettled?
Yes, I think he wrote the book Unsettled Science. I haven't had the chance to read his book yet, but it is a good there's a good couple of different debates and arguments. Another good one to follow because he's a very good rational thinker about it. I actually have his book, The Skeptical Environmentalist, is Bjorn Lomborg, actually, because he's very much about doing something about climate change, but he's also very rational and not paranoid, alarmistic about it.
No, that's good. Yeah, that's important.
But that's the thing is they don't give kids. It's bad enough when you don't give adults something they can do about it. But if you're telling kids to be paranoid and terrified that the world's going to end, and I think on the Nature article I shared with you, one of the things they say later on is among those who have talked to others about climate change, 81%, nearly half report being ignored or dismissed. There's a general othering of children in society and children's voices that threaten the predominant narrative of the most powerful group in society, says the study co-author. Until now, she adds, there's been little research on the psychological impacts of climate change on children. So there's a whole thing that apparently you're also teaching these kids to be paranoid, to be activists, and then they're upset when people don't listen to them at the same time on top of it.
So we're teaching them to be narcissists too while we're at it.
Exactly. It seems to be the problem.
Your parents are oppressing you because they don't listen to your every last concern. Yeah, did you get the feeling from this preprint that the goal of the study designers in the first place was to have the adults reading it feel like, oh my goodness, we need to do more about the climate because our poor children are so anxious about the climate, as opposed to maybe we need to talk to our children a little differently about the climate change issue so they stop being so anxious? They're two completely different goals there.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing a lot more people using the anxiety of children. On the one hand, they'll be like, kids are resilient. They don't care about masks. They don't care about being out of school. They're tough. They're resilient. They just cover your face. Okay. Right. No problems there. And parents all the while were like, what about the children's mental health? They'll be out of school. Nah, it's not a problem. Then, of course, they reopen the schools and they have the mask on. And it's like, we need to check that they're not going to commit suicide because of the climate. Oh my God. What happened to the resilient children?
Yeah.
Were they different children? Like they're only resilient for masks, but not for the climate, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So in other things that have talked about this, because this isn't necessarily entirely a new thing, because like I said, 2017 was when American Psychological Association started talking about it as the non-diagnosable mental disorder because it's not in DSM-5. Those kinds of things. So that's fun there. But the
non-diagnosable.
Yeah, it's like it's not diagnosable technically as a mental disorder because it's not in the DSM-5, but it's there in the American Psychological Association thing. So, there's that.
Wow.
You can diagnose it, but you can't. Kind of thing. But the in some of those things I have seen them say, because like in the executive summary for that APA report on that, they did go through a whole bunch of these are recommended things you can do, talk about actions you can take, or who you can talk to, or all these other kinds of things. So they do actually, to the APA's credit, because they have gotten incredibly woke in the last few years, I will give them credit for this, that they actually talk about, recommend to your kids things you can do. Talk about some of the things you can do about it. They don't go as far as...
Is this one? I'm sorry. I really shouldn't laugh. But no joke. Remember, that was the Feinstein thing where they're walking like, we need to stop people using fossil fuels. And I remember her saying, do you understand how many people are employed? Like she was trying to have a
very
rational
matter-of-factual.
conversation.
Just like, yeah, I remember that.
And I felt sort of bad for her. I actually felt a little sorry for her in the end.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think she was pilloried for that, but
yeah, but she wasn't wrong. That's the sad part. But yeah, they do. They're like, stop using all fossil fuels. Like, all right, let's try that out for a day. See how that works. Mom, can you take me to the mall? Nope. Fossil fuels.
Or get on a bicycle somehow, right? And
right. You're like
all the way across town.
Why is it so cold? What happened? I'm freezing. I've got to wear 3 sweaters and socks. Yeah, fossil fuels.
No, so like the APA and others have given some really good things of, you can try this, you can do this, take your kids and do some planting, do a recycling drive, clean up around your town, get together and start cleaning up rivers nearby. I know in my own parents' community in North Carolina, they have their, roadside pickup of trash. They go do that. It helps know things that you can do. And you can also talk about, okay, well, maybe we can do this kind of thing, or maybe you can do it in your room and figure out how to be energy efficient in your room kind of thing, if you really want to get into it. Right. The preprint, though, I haven't read it all the way through, but I found this paragraph in the conclusions that makes me think they're not as concerned about providing kids with solutions and changing how we talk about it with kids. Let me see here. To conclude, children and young people around the world report climate anxiety and distress related to both ecological destruction and inadequate government response. We argue that the failure of governments to adequately reduce, prevent, or mitigate climate change is contributing to psychological distress, moral injury, and injustice. Climate change, climate anxiety, and inadequate government responses to these chronic stressors will negatively affect mental health and well-being. This survey offers an overview. Further, detailed research is required to explore the complexities and wide variety of climate feelings. That's a first. I've never heard of climate feelings before. Anyway.
Well, go back a second. Like there were a couple sentences before you read about the something and inadequate government response will contribute to the mental health. Right? Like I want to find that sentence because that gives away
Yeah,
their agenda.
I just put it up there for you if you want.
Okay, I want to find that because that kind of gives it away where they say is it up here? Yes, to conclude, and it says here, children and young people around the world report climate anxiety distress related to both. So the distress is related to both ecological destruction and inadequate government response. We argue, this is our point of view, that the failure of governments, that's first, to adequately reduce, prevent, or mitigate climate change is contributing to psychological distress, moral injury, and there's the key, injustice. So their argument, the study designers, is that you're causing people to be upset. Fix it. Not, hey guys, maybe we should find a way to address the level of upset that is actually doable. I mean, yeah, if you shove in somebody's face any kind of statistic over, like they did with the COVID, it's like death count, death count, death count, death count. If you did that with traffic accidents, no one would ever get in a car.
Oh yeah.
You can, human beings are frighteningly easy to frighten. And especially as a group. No, it's really, it's easy. And children are the easiest ones to sit there and lay that, first of all, on the government, like fix it government.
Oh, yeah.
Is completely ludicrous. And then to say that the government's responsible for children's mental health is a very weird straight line to draw.
But yeah, let me see. They finish it with, to support mental health, public discourse should encourage the expression of feelings that 60% of young people in this survey have described as being ignored or dismissed. These feelings are important and they indicate the care and empathy young people have for our world. As one young person said, I don't want to die, but I don't want to live in a world that doesn't care about children and animals.
Okay, false premises abound in here, but to support mental health, public discourse should encourage the expression of feelings. No, that does not encourage mental health. So tell me how suicidal you are. Please, let's talk about it some more. Let's talk about how scared and hopeless you feel and anxiety ridden you are at all times. Please give voice to that. I want to hear it. Please talk more, emote. There is absolutely no evidence that talking more about how depressed you are makes you feel better. In fact, what would work better is for them to examine the reality of the situation, which is what cognitive therapy does, and compare and contrast their feelings against that reality so they can come up with strategies to deal with the problems realistically and put the rest in perspective. That's how you get people healthy. This isn't healthy. This is actually encouraging the behaviors of depressed people. But fix it, government.
It is. But I mean, I was actually just looking, I hadn't read this last paragraph and I was just like thinking to myself,
we were moved by the scale of emotional and psychological effects of climate change. We were moved. Did you go home and cry?
This is really rare actually to see a paragraph like that end up at the end of a study. Is usually you don't want to inject your own thoughts and feelings about the research into the study. You can say they're significant and what have you, but this is injecting a little bit of their own thoughts and feelings in this. I mean, you can argue the government's thing, even though I may disagree with it. You can argue the inadequate of governments, but that's an argument. That's a logical argument one might make. But this is injecting their own feelings about the results into the preprint.
But they were moved, Adrienne.
Yeah,
that's very important. Scientifically, I mean, I take the scientific research so much more seriously when someone tells me they were moved by it. I was moved.
I'm gonna have to borrow that later.
I mean, that's just like I don't expect to read a study in the Lancet and then hear how moved.
No, well, I don't expect to see it at all, right?
I don't mean to make light of this. This is a very serious problem, and it's I don't know. I find this entire thing like symptomatic of,
it's symptomatic of a very bad problem in that, you're teaching kids, for one thing, that they got to be dependent upon others. They have to be dependent on government or something along that line, which I have a problem from a political perspective. you're also teaching kids, every single thing about how they feel. You're validating it as being correct instead of addressing whether or not it is correct, amongst other things. And you're not teaching the background that maybe you shouldn't be so terrified.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And while we're at it, let's go do some science. Let's like
Yeah,
actually like learn how science works.
exactly. And so,
Because I actually think there are kids growing up believing that doing lots of surveys is science.
well, I
They
mean,
do a lot of that in science class too.
well, yeah, I mean, doing, I mean, doing surveys is part of social science. So, like, this is primarily a social science study.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you do surveys in social sciences and psychology and sociology and communications and what have you. You do those
But
kinds
as
of
we've
studies.
just seen, social science is a little
Can be a
oh.
little off.
Um,
I want to think.
I'll
I've
give you an
just
example. I'll give you an example of a science lesson that was taught to my 6th grader
Mhm.
when my middle daughter was in 6th grade. Pick her up from school. We go straight out to dinner. We're sitting there at dinner, and she says, you've probably heard this story, but maybe the audience hasn't. Hey, Mom, why do we shop at a racist grocery store? I'm like, I'm sorry, what? She said, Publix, the racist grocery store. I said, what gives you that idea? Well, my Quest teacher, they called it Quest Science, said that Publix is a racist grocery store because they are building their new location in a rich white neighborhood, creating a food desert for the poor Black people. And I said, I'm sorry, what? Wait, what? So that what? I was like, so I'm pretty furious already that they're saying that in science class they're doing. I thought you guys were planting plants this week. Yeah, we're gonna do that after we talk about food deserts. We're gonna talk about planting food, but first we're talking about food deserts. Like that would took precedence like the first or second week of 6th grade. So we go home. I open up the laptop and I type in Publix, and then I look up site selection.
Yeah.
And we see what their site selection process is. And actually, they were very careful to do site selection using the political term, because it is a political term, food desert, not a scientific term.
Yeah.
And they actually did. If you drew a circle, the 3-mile radius, and I said, look at this map. Look where the store is located. I said, who lives over here? And my kids are like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, and who lives over here? They're like, oh yeah. Like, so is it in a rich white neighborhood? They're like, no. I said, so did they follow a procedure that actually took food deserts into account? Yes. Meanwhile, they then showed them for the next week. They showed YouTube videos about food deserts. They showed, like about, I'm waiting for the science. I'm waiting for the science. I think the word food was in it. And they're like, well, at the end of the week, we're going to plant a garden. We're gonna plant a garden, and that's gonna address somehow the food desert thing. So but that was in 6th grade. That's what they were spending time on.
You're making me scared for the future of my field.
And I just thought to myself, like, so she was very upset because she wants to be a scientist. Like she actually wants to grow up and be animal scientist, but still. And so by 7th grade, she's like, Mom, I'm really pissed off. Like, when are they going to teach me some real science? Like, when am I going to learn anything about science? I said, that's an excellent question. I really don't know. Cause I remember 6th grade, we were like making batteries, or whatever we were doing, like, look, a circuit with a potato, whatever it was that we did, it was some kind of science.
I'm going to say ego brain. If that really happened, holy hell, turn in the teacher for something.
Wait. I'm sorry. What? If we kill ourselves, do it by turning the car on in a closed garage. So be
holy crap, man.
Wow.
What?
But what about the greenhouse gases?
I mean, yeah. I mean, you'd be emitting CO2 from the car, and I mean that's what would kill you would be the suffocation because there would be no oxygen. I swear to God, it's like whomever that teacher is, they should not be teaching. Because for one thing, you're encouraging suicide, and for another, like, what?
I'm just, yeah. And then this says, more modern vehicles emit much less carbon monoxide than earlier. Yeah, so that wouldn't even kill you. It's not going to kill you quickly enough.
Well, I mean, if you went into a closed space where you had very little ventilation, yeah, eventually the CO2 would build up, and
eventually
you would get killed off by the suffocation. It would replace the oxygen.
It's disgusting. I like that. That person needs to be
sorry,
fired.
Eco Brain. I'm sorry. Deb, I disavow. Don't do what I said. Don't do what I said. I don't want to get you struck on YouTube. Don't do what I said.
No, yeah, no. We were just scientifically discussing the ratios of no, never. Please don't.
Don't do it. Sorry, Deb.
Don't do any
I
of
hope I
this.
don't get you accidentally demonetized.
As they're busy teaching our kids that like their parents and their grandparents are, destroying their future by destroying the planet, they're teaching them how to. This is just not okay.
No, but
None of this
in
is
the vein
okay.
of somewhere around the year 2000. Okay, right. Well, in the vein of solutions, what could we do about this nonsense? Let's try to go on a positive note, right?
Right.
Um, I mean, the first thing that I would say for those of you guys worried about eco anxiety would be demanding, as with many other things, to see the curriculum your kids are being taught, or asking
Right.
and talking with your kids about how they're learning about this stuff, or learning about
Yeah.
that, actually learning about science, and not why the Publix down the street is racist. Um, and those kinds of
Or
things.
even spending like a week on food deserts.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's one thing where I would start is if you're in public school or private school, demand the curriculum and how they're teaching about climate change to make sure they're not teaching your kid to be terrified that the world's about to end, because that's just going to end badly. Those kinds of things. Homeschooling, I know there's a lot of good I've been meaning to collect them all, but I think there's a lot of good resources as regards to climate change that are not alarmistic and crazy. I think some of the stuff, I know you've sent me some of it, and I watched a bunch of it and was like, that's not going to help anybody learn about climate change or climate science. Darn it. Those kinds of things. So, I mean, may have to do a video on that soon. I'm still reading through it.
That would be good. I mean, it is something I think kids, especially moving forward in the future, need to know about. But I still come back to the idea that if we did a solid job teaching kids even basic science, like in other words, just teach them science the way, I was taught as a kid, the way maybe you were taught, like, going back in time to where you're teaching them about the scientific process of inquiry. You teach them the discipline to focus on the search for truth and facts and data, and you go where the data takes you. If we just really impressed upon them the importance of integrity in scientific research, that there's no such thing as settled science, all of that. And then as they get older, like you said, have classes for those kids who are scientifically inclined, really interested in the subject. I'd say by like 8th grade going into the high school level, then you could have some electives perhaps of like, that really dive into the climate stuff to prepare them for careers in STEM or doing research like what you do, so that they could be part of the discipline that's going to help us find these solutions. And there are other disciplines too, like if they were really well grounded in all of in science, and they pursued a course of study in college that was in like energy, for example, they were learning about the production of energy and so forth. One big untapped area is finding ways to store energy that's not nuclear rod. So, nuclear fuel, but finding other ways that we could store energy in sort of non-nuclear fuel. Are there ways to do it that we can store electricity that aren't batteries? Like right now, it's as much a fantasy as flying was for people in, the 1700s.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not possible.
Well, I mean, the batteries thing, it actually works in a small scale. Like Tesla's making batteries that you can connect up to your solar panels on the roof to store the energy and things like that. And I know a few folks here in the middle of the country who have solar panels on their roofs, and it's great for them because they don't pay anywhere near as much in energy. It works for them. But what they haven't figured out is the storage of electricity on a mass scale yet to do like city
exactly. And that's what I'm talking about. But there's just like to let them know that, these are fields where we're going to need people. But in order to really, if you really want to help, if you really want to make a difference, go to school and be really good at math. Like do your level best to be good at math. But if this is of interest to you and you want to help, save the planet, do well in math, do well in science, teach real science, teach physics, teach chemistry, teach, the natural sciences, and teach research methodology so that it's solid. And then, and if you focus on how academic excellence is going to produce the people who are going to solve this problem, And if you actually introduce them to people such as yourself, like people who did have, do excellent work in school and are now researching it, if they actually got to be face to face with actual climate researchers to see like, hey guys, we are working on it. It's not, you're looking at government, but hi, it's like, I'm here, I'm researching, I'm working on this. There are people around the world. There's guys in like the polar ice caps, like drilling ice tubes and stuff. There's people who are spending their lives working on this. Why don't we show them how they work?
Well,
why don't we actually show them what people are doing? Well, because there
yeah,
wouldn't be any political hay in that. That's why.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the thing is, like, solar and wind and water only go so far. And I think in particular because solar and wind are not very energy dense, meaning you have to have a lot of solar panels to get the same amount of output that you would get from a nuclear plant, or a lot of windmills to get the same thing. And that means you have to stick it in big places out in the middle of nowhere with all the wiring and things like that to get it to whatever it's feeding and those kinds of things. So, I mean, what I'm really looking forward to is you get into the next generation of energy. And that's where we need actually very good scientists and engineers to be thinking about the next generation of energy. So like, I know somebody, there was a paper a couple of years ago, somebody's invented a blast furnace in Europe that uses plastic. Great way to get rid of plastic and create energy that way. The other kind of thing is, I know hydrogen fuel cells are starting to be a thing, although the problem with a hydrogen fuel cell is if it gets a nick in it, it blows up.
That's a problem.
So you got to solve those kinds of problems. And then there's the other things like carbon capture and storage. The idea that you convert gaseous carbon dioxide back into just carbon and oxygen and as byproducts, you can reuse the carbon again as energy somewhere else. It's a brilliant kind of idea.
But this is what kids like. They don't have the background knowledge to understand. Another thing that they could gain is historical perspective. So, for example, if you just took kids back to the early industrial era in the United States, and what horribly polluted air there was, it was in some parts of the country, like you couldn't go outside without being like covered in soot, right? And then you also had indoor air pollution because people were burning coal and wood and carbon-based stuff. And it was just like everyone was filthy and getting lung cancer and lung disease and all kinds of stuff. And that was how it was because people didn't know any better. And then they came up with these other cleaner ways to do things. And now obviously, you can go, the air is so much cleaner in big cities than it ever was. Even the smog over Los Angeles. When I was a kid, it was orange.
Yeah.
Literally, LA was orange air. And now it's a lot cleaner. Like, we have cleaned up our air tremendously. And if you could show them that, they would see that it is possible to make huge progress. And all it takes is a few really smart people who, studied it, found new ways to do it. You could be those people, but you're not going to be those people if you spend your time getting on a bus, going to DC and holding a poster, screaming and yelling. That doesn't change anything either. What changes it is, remember, like, what's the point? Why to go to school? Because you could be the next Tesla. You could be the next whomever.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
But you can't be that. even Tesla had to study. Like, even he didn't emerge from the womb knowing what he knew about math and science. It just so happened that he was a mega genius who had that weird ability to see things completely whole in his brain. Like, every idea he ever had was like a movie in his mind. Yeah, he was an interesting case, but he still had to learn math.
Oh yeah, no, and there's the thing there is just like one big thing. Don't teach kids that all they have to do is scream problem, and expect somebody else to solve it. You have to teach kids that they have to be the ones to get out there and solve it, not in the, you have to fix the generations of the past and all this kind of other stuff, like the world's on your shoulders. But know that there are tangible problems related to this bigger thing that you're concerned about that you can go and solve. You can be the amazing scientist who contributes and solves this problem. And you got to put that into that positive spin. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of really depressed, really, really depressed folks who are just like, I can't do anything. And just like, and science really does thrive on people who are energetic and optimistic and really curious, wanting to figure out how to answer these questions, in part because, they see the problems that we have in society and they want to address it. Although they got to make sure that, you're always interested. When you're doing the research itself, you're interested in the truth. You can have a reason for wanting to do that research, but when you're doing the research, it may come up with an answer that you don't want or you don't like. You still
Well,
got
that's true, but you got to be willing to go where it takes you. And that's, you know, I'm listening to the biography of Thomas Sowell Maverick and by Jason Riley. And just today I heard a section. It was something that Thomas Sowell said about how, you know, facts are so fundamental that you really can't hope to help anybody or solve any problem unless you start with the facts and, you know, and use that. I wish I had the exact quote, but it was kind of like, you have to know where you actually are before you can get to where you want to go. So if you do anything that tries to get around the facts or ignore the facts or cover them up to get to some other destination, you're not going to get where you really want to go because you're not starting from reality. Reality is your baseline. And that's what I used to think, like, science was the one discipline. It was the one area that, like, well, they can't possibly corrupt that because science deals in facts, right? And I'm rapidly realizing that's not the case. And I just think, you know, the other thing we can do is show kids that, you know, every adult was a kid once.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, they had a different set of problems that they were looking ahead to deal. Like I said, nuclear war was the thing that I was terrified of. I grew up with, you know, the Cold War. And so to sit there and say, like, why aren't you fixing it, mom, dad, government, whoever? And it's like, well, not every one of us is going to have the skills or the talent, you know, to fix everything. I'm fixing the things I can fix. I'm doing what I can do to take care of my family. If this is of great interest to you, then by all means, please go study these subjects and do these things. That is something you can do. But as you pointed out, looking to other people to fix all the problems is a problem.
Yep.
It's not the problem. It is a big problem. And that's how these kind of problems get bigger and bigger and bigger, is if everyone in every generation went, fix it. Who's fixing it?
Who's going to fix it?
Who's fixing it? It's like the people go, pay for my college. Like, well, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to be working? Or who's going to have the money to pay for your college? You know, I mean, they don't understand cause effect. They don't understand any of this. And that's why teaching science the real way, then they'd learn, oh, cause effect. Correlation isn't causation. All these basic fundamental rules of life that somehow I managed to graduate from high school knowing. No, seriously, tell me, you're on Twitter, right? And you'll see people saying, well, this caused that. And you're like, that's not how it works.
No, just because they have a relationship. I mean, it doesn't mean, That's
not how it works. And yet they'll, you know, like, this was the outcome, you know, there's a disparate outcome, Kendi, right? Somewhere somebody is achieving less and they're black. That means racism. And like, no. That's just not how science works.
Fallacy. That's a disparity fallacy. Coleman used it very well. The disparity fallacy.
Well, and it works in climate science too, right? So they'll say, like the guy with the snowball.
Yep.
Right.
Well, this can't be true. This disproves climate change because I have a snowball because there's a blizzard outside. No, that's not how it works.
Or in the converse, you know, like, it's 5 degrees hotter this year at this time than it was last year. That proves the world's going to end in 12 years. Like, no. None of it proves what you're saying it proves. All it proves is that, you know what, the weather can be different from year to year. That's what those two factoids prove. Beyond that, you need a lot more data to prove either of those statements to be true. And they're both wrong. So
they are both wrong.
I don't know. And I'm not even a climate scientist. So that's the other thing in K-12. And it seems like with the study, there's not a lot of be aware of what you don't know.
No, there is not. There is not. There is a push that I've noticed of, we're absolutely certain of all of these different things. We know this, we know that. And there is, to be fair, there's a lot of fundamentals with climate change and what have you that we know very well. But exactly what it means in terms of impacts going forward into the future, anything like that, there's still a lot of things that we're uncertain about. Like a prime example is the guys who were already starting to yell that, you know, climate change caused that tornado outbreak in Tennessee and Arkansas. And Kentucky, no. There's some studies that suggest with that climate change will make the background conditions that lead to a tornado outbreak more likely.
Right.
But no, you can't say that climate change caused that tornado outbreak. That doesn't make any sense.
No. And I mean, it's an interesting question to ask,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I can see people ask the question like, could it have? That's valid.
Yeah.
But wait for the answer. And what I'm noticing in politics and journalism is they don't. They're like, the headline will read, could climate change be behind this? But it's not, it's like a rhetorical question. They're
Yeah.
not asking to understand or anything. They're asking to put the impression in your mind that it did. And
Mhm.
then, of course, they go out and they interview a bunch of people who are mostly activists, not scientists, or they might cherry pick the one scientist who's been saying tornadoes are caused by climate change and put that person in. And there's their story that gets lots of clicks. But yeah, this is so getting back to the anxiety piece of it.
Yeah.
So your I don't know, it's not argument, but like your point today is that K-12 kids are anxious
Yeah.
about climate change and their
Well,
anxiety
going
is
into college, because remember this was 16 to 25-year-olds, this Lancet thing.
that's true. But they couldn't have gotten there if they
They couldn't have
didn't.
gotten there without somebody telling them about it. Let me
And
see.
they couldn't have gotten there without it probably being told to them for quite a while, I would think, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
let me
I
here,
don't
I
think
was just
1
checking to
year
make
of
sure. I was just checking to make sure with the study design. Data were collected from 10,000 young people by participant recruitment platform Kantar. Participants were drawn from Kantar's network, including their LifePoints online research panel, 45 million people from 20 countries and 26 languages, from 42 countries and 26 languages.
yeah.
LifePoints panels actively managed to maximize inclusivity and representativeness of samples and monitor validity and quality of responses. Participants were eligible if aged 16 to 25 and living in one of 10 countries selected. These countries were chosen to reflect populations from global north and south, reflecting a range of cultures, incomes, climates, climate vulnerabilities, and exposure to differing intensities of climate-related events. So they did really cover their bases on
Okay.
where from, but these are mostly, kids who are, I hate to say kids because I mean you are crossing into adulthood with that, but 16 to 25. Um, and I imagine they probably picked 16 to 25 if they were doing, global, because that's easier to get IRB approvals in the US for one thing. But IRB being internal review board for universities, for those who don't know. But the other
Right.
thing is like for some of those countries that were in there, like Nigeria, India, Philippines, what have you, they may not have a whole lot of younger kids than that in the pool that they could pull from anyway.
Makes sense.
So
Yeah.
that would logically make sense to me. But
Right.
we'll have to see. So let me see. What is it? Oh, actually, they did have an age breakdown. Look at that. So, okay. So it's roughly 50-50. So 49% are 16 to 20, 51% are 21 to 25.
Okay. But I mean, it's still, to me, it's still indicative of lessons they probably had prior to being 16.
Yeah.
I don't think they got it all like that year. To get to a level of anxiety about something, it has to be repeated enough times that
Mhm.
you can't escape it. It's just kind of on your radar constantly.
Right.
And also, these kids are getting it places other than K-12. So that's another thing for parents to remember is that your K-12 child is not just exposed to what they're getting in the school, but they're getting it also in mainstream media and
Mhm.
entertainment and social media, and all of that. So if there's nothing to counterbalance it in the school, and theoretically, because we always got messages, political and otherwise, we didn't have social media, but we always got stuff from entertainment. We always had stuff just kind of out there, right? Or parents talking. But if you went to school and in school, there was this kind of like neutral or, scientific approach to things. You talk about things, whatever. I personally found it comforting because it was like, oh, at least at a minimum, I'd be like, oh, there's a lot I don't understand about that thing. Right. I still have a lot to learn about, or I have this place to go where I got to focus on my kid thing, which is learning
Yep.
this stuff that I don't know now. And it was almost like a little bit of a buffer to the outside world. So you get the messages, you get that stuff, but here we deal in facts, or here we deal in things where it's more like memorize the stuff and do the stuff
But
and read
school
these
isn't
books.
that anymore.
It's not, I think it would be better. Some people complain like it was too disconnected from real world, and maybe that's true, but I don't think the answer is the opposite, where we're doing TikToks in class, and they're teachers literally in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, who are using TikTok in the classroom.
Oh, good
They're
grief.
using YouTube in the classroom. That means they're going and pulling the outside world with all of its crazy mixed messages and political messages and stuff and half understandings into the classroom. So these kids have nowhere to go to escape it. So they're getting it 24/7. And I say that as a current homeschooling parent, because even though my kids are out of that environment now and have been for 2.5 and 3 years respectively, they're still not so much in the climate stuff, but on other issues, they're still coming to me with some of the things that the public school kids are getting worked up about.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can't get away from it even when their schooling isn't covering it. So you can imagine the anxiety must be intense because they're getting it all the time. All
Yep.
the time. They can't get away from it. The
No.
school's doing exactly what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, no, and you're
And
making
CNN in the classroom.
you're making the perfect point, actually, because that is the other thing is, like I did say, you do want to keep an eye on what the curriculum is with teachers, and if they're pushing something that is causing kids to feel more terrified than actually be able to do something about it. That's two different things. Yeah, I've thought about it a bit. I don't necessarily have a problem with, talking about a current event or issue in the classroom, so long as you are not stoking fear and anxiety in kids to do that, or making kids angry or what have you. And that's the problem with eco-anxiety in the classroom is if you're doing that, that's a problem. You're not making things better for your students. You're not helping with the mental health issue. Goodness knows that. But yeah, there's a lot of different things that one can do to just sort of address that. If you really do have students who end up who care a lot about climate change and what have you, and what we talked about, actually learn more about the science, learn about this and that, talk to an actual scientist, because I can point your locals folks and everything to a whole bunch of resources I know of where there's actual different things. So I will say, for you watching in the US, in the vast majority of your 50 states here, almost every state has one of these. They have their own state climate office, actually. Historically, they've been tasked with, keeping track of the state's historical climate and how's it changed, and, records and all those kinds of different things. But they also do stuff in terms of talking about climate change now. And they're actually generally very good about being very even-handed with it and not being very alarmistic that the world's going to end. So in your respective states, they do also have those, and a lot of them do outreach with K-12 programs, and a lot of them will do outreach if you ask them to do with homeschool communities too. So if you're looking for it, Deb, the website to go check about your local state climate office is the American Association of State Climatologists.
Okay. I just looked up like North Carolina, the North Carolina one.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what it shows me.
Unless they changed something recently.
Well, this is what it shows.
Yeah.
It shows, from the mountains to the Outer Banks, and they have like monitoring, so you could see current conditions, stations, all this cool stuff. Education homepage, learn about the climate and weather, webinars and recordings. They've got all kinds of cool stuff. This is really great. What a great resource. Thank you so much for this. No, this is fantastic, you guys, because if you have a kid, and this is just my state, but you could go look up your own. If you have a kid who's getting anxious about this, or about one who is, go to this, because I find the more you have actual knowledge, the more you're looking at real data, it's very comforting.
Yep.
Because it's showing the kids there are people working on this. It's being monitored. It's being monitored. Okay. It's not just this like runaway vehicle. That's just like, right. They're watching, they're keeping track. Look at this is what it means. You start to learn more about it. And that kind of knowledge, I think, is really, really helpful. It's not just the scary stuff.
Yes, Giorgio, I know the association has a DEI statement.
Everyone does
now. That right now. Most of the climate offices are really good, though, so don't go too crazy about that.
Yeah. And then they have like all these different reports, drought, weather, or soil,
Mhm.
urban heat islands, etc.,
Mhm.
which is a
Each
real
one of the
thing.
each one of the, state climate offices is headed by their director, which is usually the state climatologist for the respective state. So, you've got a state climatologist in North Carolina. I've got one here in my state, and so you can get into that. And a lot of them will do K through 12 outreach. They've
Right.
often talked to homeschool communities too. So if you're homeschooling, you can book with them.
Right.
You probably saw it on the site, Deb, that they have a thing of let's meet.
Yeah,
For that
exactly.
group. So you
Now,
can
as
do
far
things like
as
that, and they're generally very good about talking about it in an even-handed manner to not go with the alarmistic direction, even if their own personal beliefs are such.
right. And the thing about diversity and stuff is that the reality is that all of these endeavors, like every scientist and every scientific office and whatever, they're either literally connected. This one is NC State. So they're literally connected to a university that's connected to the state, or they get grant funding or whatever from
Right.
government agencies. So what everybody needs to understand is that at this present time,
You're not
all
gonna
of
get away
that,
from it too much.
they're required. It's not their decision. They have to have an equity policy. Everything connected to government at this point, it's coming down from on high, and it's been in place at least since the Obama administration. It's not even just Joe Biden, okay? If you go back and you look at the Obama administration, at the Department of Education, which also controls higher education, they were required for their funding, grant funding, all of it, to have an equity policy, an equity mission statement. It's not up to them. They will not get funded. Now, I want the Department of Education done away with.
Mhm.
I'm an abolitionist. So, but I just want to say that like I can't indict like every person into
Right.
these offices because they are complying with the law. They don't have a choice, unfortunately. It
Yeah.
tells you why it's so important to keep an eye on what your lawmakers are doing.
And I will say, actually, because the way the state climate offices work, so this is a little bit of history, but the state climate office program used to be a NOAA program until the 1970s when NOAA National Weather Service realized this is way too expensive and said to the states, you do this. Um,
Yeah.
so it all got turned over to the states in the 1970s. And so the North Carolina one is actually one of the biggest climate offices in the country. So they do a tremendous amount. Um, and they got started like right into the 1970s and what have you. And if they're in the NC State area, they share the same building as the Weather Service office in Raleigh. So they're over there, but that got shifted. But when the states took it over, it really kind of depended on how the state wanted to do it. So like North Carolina, they left it alone. The state climatologist is not appointed by the governor. That's part of, I think, by the president or the board of trustees of NC State, is whom the state climatologist is appointed by, or hired by, if you will. I'm not entirely sure how it works. And the other thing, like in Georgia, for instance, the state climatologist is actually appointed by the governor. So it really depends upon which state you're
Mhm.
in and how it works, but they're generally good offices to work with. You might have to be patient with some of them because the some of them are smaller offices, and so it's like maybe one or two persons, or maybe just the state climatologist by themselves. So that's, you got to be patient sometimes if you want them to actually come and speak, but they
Mhm.
can still work it out if you give them enough notice.
But even glancing at all the people involved in the state climate office staff, they all look to be under the age of 40. Okay. Maybe 40 at the oldest. And like I said, I think if you took kids to something like this and showed them like these are the people that, I just think it's aspirational.
Hmm.
Right. So if you're a person who's really concerned about this, like, look, here's these people, and they're not like old, crusty, gray haired people that you can't relate to. These are people who, look pretty young, and they're working on this really hard. And, you could be one of them someday. Is that of interest to you? Do you want to go do something like this? Like, we need to do a better job of giving our kids hope and empowering them to be part of the solution, like a really important part of the solution, not just like, screaming.
Well,
That's not
and
part of the
also, yeah,
solution.
and also not the screaming, but also not the burden fear of, oh my God, I got to solve all the world's problems. Those are two very different things. You got to find
Right.
a happy medium in the middle of helping kids to realize they can do something very tangible with their lives if this is something that concerns them. And it doesn't
Right.
have to be working as a scientist. You could end up being an engineer, you could end up working in transportation, what have you, any number of different things where you can get involved in that at this point.
Exactly.
Because it's
I
like,
want to address this real quick. Sorry, Tony.
yeah,
You're absolutely right. There is a difference. And so I misstated when I said, complying with the law. It's not the law, it's a policy directive with the Department of Education. So for example, if you want access to their money, which of course everybody does, because that's the only way they get funded, um, you must do these things. And it's part of how they get around the Constitution. So again, a reason why I want the Department of Education disbanded, because they do these little things, like they basically extort compliance with their political ideals and values by dangling this carrot and saying, we can't make you because Constitution, but we can appropriate funds from Congress. We can ask Congress to give us money. Congress gives us money. And then we can go, we'll give you a grant. We're handing out grant money, but you have to do this. And so the only slight difference when it comes to K-12, where I would say it comes up to against like legal, it's the law, is that Congress passed laws mandating certain things like the Title I funding, Title IX, these kinds of things are laws made by Congress that now equate to entitlements that have to be funded. Otherwise, they're an unfunded mandate. But that's still within the Constitution. Like, it's still constitutionally okay because Congress made it a law that it's administered through the Department of Education to give you that funding. So you are out of compliance if you don't have an equity plan to get that title funding. So you see how they kind of like do it. That's why they've got to get rid of that Department of Education, in my opinion. If you want to get away from these kinds of things, and you might say, well, where will the money come from? Congress can still fund things without that agency to do it. They do it every day.
yeah.
Do it some other way. Okay. So,
But yeah, so I mean, in the vein of good things to look at, I think the climate offices do a good job of talking about the issue without getting into freaking people out, essentially. I think another one is like, I know in North Carolina, well, I'm thinking of a bunch of different things, but I can compile a whole list of resources if you'd like. I don't have to belabor the belabor the point here on where to go looking for climate information that's not going to terrify your kids.
yeah. Yeah. No, but I can't thank you enough for coming here and like sharing all this info with us, because this is an area where I really don't know anything about it. I mean, I know there's a lot that I don't know about. I know that climate change is real. Like, I'm not a denier that it's happening, but I have a lot of questions about whether it's anthropogenic and all that, and what can we do. I know enough to know that I shouldn't be super anxious all day, but I should definitely be concerned about my own personal choices. And that's just what I think most parents would like their kids to be. It's like, don't be, don't waste, don't pollute, don't, be conscious. We're all going to try to be conscious. But the schools, the K-12 and the media is, pushing the anxiety. So hopefully we can take some of your, I hope we can get this show out. Please share, comment, get it out to more people. Maybe some educators will pick up on it and see that like they got to do something different in their classroom, because I don't think the answer is to take the anxiety to Washington. I think the anxiety is the answer is to reduce the anxiety.
Yeah. Give
right?
things, tangible things you can do that's not just screaming and shouting at the top of your lungs.
Exactly. And everybody, please, I'm putting this back up again. Subscribe to her channel, because today's show about eco anxiety was just like a tiny little taste. What you're going to get at ScioSophia is you're going to get, like, you see how she showed you that study from the Lancet? You're going to get access to studies that you probably wouldn't otherwise see because they're behind a paywall. And you're going to get a scientist who knows how to read studies going through them and saying, you know how you maybe just saw in the news that study says X, right? Well, let me take you in this. And
With
some of the
action
studies you
steps.
cover, you actually cover a fair number of studies that pertain to education, don't you? This isn't like
I ended up doing it, yeah, because it does pertain to, I mean, I think about it particularly with like the future of science and what you're doing with education. So like related to this one, related to what we talked about today, what I covered, I think before the holiday break, was the Green Kids study, where they were talking about how
Yeah.
you should frame communications of climate and environmental issues
Right.
in, yes, there is a stuffed Angry Bird in the background, yes. How you should frame climate change issues in a classroom, and they were talking about, well, you can get more of the response you want out of kids if you tell them
Yeah.
climate change is their fault, kind of thing. That was a study out of the Netherlands, which is prime example of a study. Yeah, it did answer a question. Don't know if it was morally right to do that study, but
Well, and that's true of like a lot of stuff. You've looked at some studies that you're like, how is this even a study? You know, like,
well,
or
in the last one I looked at, one of the last ones I looked at that I was like laughing hysterically is, oh, wait. Pantyhose? You want to put pantyhose on your head to fit a mask better? I'm just like, A, that was one person of the 4-person sample who said the pantyhose fit better. What the?
yeah, that's insane. Or then didn't you do one on the transformative SEL?
Yes, I did.
Non-study. So you guys, if you're interested in social emotional learning, which I talk about on this channel all the time, she took the transformative SEL study that I attempted in my feeble way to go through on this channel from to decipher word salad. So I came at it from here's what they're actually saying to you in the word salad part philosophically. And then, Adrian looked at it in terms of like, this isn't science. Like, just so you know, but she goes through it much better, so you should really go watch it. And anyway, I can't thank you enough. I really
Oh,
appreciate you giving
can I
so
add
much
one thing?
yes,
Because I
yes,
almost
yes,
forgot.
yes.
By the way, locals, come down there and join locals too. I will just let folks know, if you want to have a free month in my locals, the promo code is Pioneer in all capital letters, and you get 1 month for free in my locals as a supporter.
And you do a live, right, weekly in your locals or something? Don't you do
Yeah, I mean, I'm out of lives right now because of locals thing for like limits if you're in a certain community. So I'm out until I think next week. But
Okay.
yeah. So every Thursday night on YouTube, it's a premiere video where I just run through a study. It's a long video. It's like an hour long usually. But then after that, exclusively for local supporters, I open up a live stream for everybody to come in and just ask whatever questions they want. So long as you're a supporter in my locals, to just say what answers do you want about this particular study or that particular study, or suggested studies. I actually have a list of like 4 studies I can't pick from. So I think I'm going to put it in my locals for supporters and members to vote on what's the next one you want me to go through.
Yeah. But I mean, since we're being bombarded every day with study says, experts say, and they'll give you, and they do it every time. They'll give you their synopsis or their analysis in this press, and then they put a link to the study, and you go to, you're like, oh, damn it, I can only read the abstract. Well, that's why you need to go to the channel, because then she goes through it and tells you what it actually says. So that's what I love about it. I think it's like, I feel like I'm getting, the real story, behind the things that they're, well, no, because the only caution is that it might make you even more upset about the mainstream media than you already are. So that's one little risk. I don't want to dissuade you from subscribing to our channel, but just be advised that you will not become more enamored of the mainstream media.
Yeah, no, and I will say in that vein, my goal with that is not to make you distrust scientists, because a lot of scientists are really, really good people, and a lot of them do a good job of caveating their studies and things like that, which you're supposed to do if you're going to make a robust conclusion and all these kinds of things. Right. And then there are other things that are activism guidebooks that are not studies, and I just point that out alongside.
Well, and also
good studies, but just answered a stupid question.
But also remember that the media picks studies that are going to get it clicks and eyeballs. So, you have this whole world of science and all kinds of studies that are research that's going on, and they'll go cherry pick things. They probably have a little research person whose sole job at various networks and publications is to go find something that's politically controversial that we can put up here. And then they just take the digest and they put, the abstract. And half the time they only go from the abstract. So they misrepresent what the study even says. So you can't even blame the scientists. You got to blame. So the point is that we lay people have to find a better way. And I think your channel does a great job of this, of looking at what's being sold to us as science
Mhm.
or a scientific conclusion so that we don't make decisions about our daily lives based
Mhm.
on the science that isn't really the science.
Mhm. Well, if you
So,
saw, I mean, what you're talking about, Deb, like the live stream I did recently on my channel with Unwokeable, that was a great study actually about, you know, the appropriate uses of masking and things like that, in here. And and it was interesting because that was the study on which the American Choral Directors Association based the guidance that you should put masks on musicians while they're playing instruments. Um, and I had to say
with
to,
a little hole.
yeah, with the little hole and everything. The thing about it is that's not what they tested in that study. They didn't test that. So the guidance from the American Choral Directors Association was based on a question that was not answered by the study. The study was actually really well done, but but it was the wrong guidance based on that study. The guidance was putting mask on musician, but what they actually tested was whether or not you could put like a pantyhose, something or another on the bell to prevent the aerosol that's going from your mouth through the bell from going out into the room.
That's a very different thing
Uh-huh.
than covering your face and cutting a little hole in it and letting the aerosols out anyway. Wow, this is funny. Check this out. A science teacher once told me that the moon has dust, and I told her, "How can the moon have dust if outer space is a vacuum?"
I don't know. Good answer to that, actually. That's
But I do know that the footprints on the moon
Mhm,
will never go away
mhm.
because of
And it's in part because of the vacuum and gravity, actually.
yeah, exactly.
Also
So,
because the dust on the moon is not weathered because people are not trampling it and we don't have rain and snow and things like that on there. So it's all these little sharp, jagged bits of dust that just easily clumps together.
right, exactly. Well, I want to thank you again so much. Everybody go subscribe, like, comment, share this video, subscribe to ScioSophia and the locals and mine too. If you're not already
Yes, go
subscribed.
into Deb's because Deb's is, well, you're on this side on me, but go into Deb's because hers is so dang amazing when you get to talk about education stuff and the intersection of all these different kinds of topics. So yes,
Yeah.
if you're not in Deb's locals, you should be, and I would
The
recommend
reason
being
we
a supporter.
learn.locals.com. But yeah, both of us and whatever. I mean, I know everybody can't support everybody, but we appreciate your support tremendously. So thank you guys. And we're gonna sign off. Please do share this out so more people can see it. And thanks everybody for coming. And I'll see you next time. Bye.